And we've just been listening to the Russian President Vladimir Putin there, giving that long-delayed State of the Nation address to both houses of Parliament in Moscow. This, of course, coming just a few days before the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Oliver Farry, you've been listening into that speech with me as well. Not a lot of different rhetoric there, of course, from Vladimir Putin, saying once again the West is completely responsible for the escalation of the war there.
That's right. It was a rambling but not entirely incoherent speech from Vladimir Putin. It was very much one aimed at the domestic market. It's for Russian people to basically give the impression that Russia is still standing tall. The war is not going near as bad as people abroad are saying, and that Russia stands unbowed. There was quite a lot of whataboutery in it. The United States was blamed, and NATO also was blamed for provoking the war in Ukraine. This has been a line that has been peddled by Moscow constantly over the past 12 months. Vladimir Putin pointed to the United States' own adventures abroad, many of them disastrous. He mentioned Iraq, he mentioned Libya, and also Syria. Syria, perhaps he didn't get exactly correct there, but he is correct in pointing out the United States, what they have done abroad, but it doesn't really tally with what is happening in Ukraine. But he knows that this is simply a ploy in which to show that, well, forget about what we're doing. Look at what the United States have done, and there was very much casting the West in a different light to what people in the West would see them. I mean, even maybe perhaps quite a lot of Russians might not necessarily see them in that way.
There was also a lot of familiar and yet very provocative imagery, particularly those references to Nazi attributes, the Nazis.
That's right. At one point, Vladimir Putin likened the war in Ukraine to the Great Patriotic War, which is what the Russians call the Second World War. I mean, they view it very much as a war that was of existential survival. And of course, the Soviet Union did suffer by far the greatest civilian deaths and military deaths during the Second World War. So the Russians do definitely view the Second World War quite differently from people in the West do. It's equally momentous, but it's definitely got its own particular Russian character for Russians. Now, the bizarre thing here is, of course, he's likening it to the Great Patriotic War, but Vladimir Putin still can't bring himself to call it a war. It's still the special military operation in Ukraine. There was also quite a lot of projection, so to speak, where Vladimir Putin accuses the West and Ukraine of doing what Russia itself is doing. He accuses them of sowing disinformation constantly throughout the Ukraine war. He says that Russia is fighting for the existence of its country. That is something that has equally been said of Ukraine, which is a country that will probably have its independence squashed and wiped off the map if Russia were to run it over. He even at one point realized something that was being carried by pro-Russian Twitter accounts over the last few days, which was he accused Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, of awarding the Edelweiss badge to a mountain unit of the Ukrainian forces. Now, he said that this is a Nazi badge. Now, it is true that there was a unit of the Wehrmacht during the Second World War, which did have the Edelweiss unit, but this is actually common in pretty much all Alpine units in countries in Europe, including France, Italy, Slovenia, Germany, and also Russia. There is actually a National Guard troop unit stationed in the North Caucasus that was awarded the Edelweiss badge in 1998. Edelweiss is, of course, it's an alpine plant which grows at altitude, so it's generally used in this. Most people would probably be best familiar with it as a song from The Sound of Music. So trying to pin Edelweiss, particularly as a Nazi attribute, is a little bit of a stretch for Vladimir Putin.
All right, Oliver, thank you for that.